I'm going to kind of go to the educator perspective first and foremost. I think, Randy, kind of jump right to it, because I think in many ways supporting educators in the classroom is kind of the key that we're after. And I've always kind of, tried to think about this idea of what do we need as an educator in the classroom. You've got your students, you want to support them, you want to make sure that they have every opportunity possible. What are your biggest challenges as an educator in a classroom to feel like you can become involved in work-based learning access for your students? What are your biggest challenges? And if anyone in this group could bring something to the classroom to help you out as an educator to support your students, what would it be?
Oh, that's a huge question. So the biggest problem I've seen over the last 18 years or so getting involved, when you were at Salt Lake Community College and starting up the bio program, we had all these resources and great opportunities for students. Students that would come to the program would have jobs ready for them. There's an obvious need and stuff. And we never could quite figure out how to get students into the class. And that's been an ongoing problem. And in the last 5-8 years, to the point where parts of the program have been cut or changed or deleted, so that we don't have all those resources that we used to have. And I don't know how to get students in there.
And and that's Sandy, I know that you've kind of, with the Biotech program at Granite School District, similar situation, getting kids in the classroom just so they can know about it.
Right. So Biotech is a hard sell. And the reason it's a hard sell is nobody knows what it is. Healthcare, I can fill our healthcare classes, nurses, EMTs, farm techs, I can fill that 100-fold. Biotech is just this place that we've struggled with. And people will say to me, oh, you have the wrong name. Oh, you have, but in all honesty, if students don't know what it is, then you can't grow it. And so we actually tried something new this year, which is interesting. We had kids at our technical center, and our technical center serves 8 high schools plus people across our region. Kids can come from their high schools. And we held a Bring a Friend to School Day. And every student was allowed to bring a student that was a friend, but the kids couldn't come unless they had a friend to come with, because the friends talked to them about programs. And it was fascinating because that strategy, which I wouldn't have told you would work, we just made it up, we have doubled the enrollment in biotech. Yes?
I have a question for both of you. What is your average student, if you're at different institutions, what is your average student demographic age?
Our average student age?
Yeah.
We serve 9 through 12.
Okay.
And there are specific students who can come into different 9th grade programs. So those are designated. They fulfill their science credits. And so we have targeted classes for them so that we can then offer more opportunities in STEM and pathways.
And you're at college?
Ours, we're 10 through 12. And
Oh, you're supposed to
yeah, but our biotech programs just concurrent enrollment, so students typically won't take it until their junior or senior year.
And so, and then one of the things, and I know that Linnea, you pointed out too, that you've seen kind of a similar trend in enrollments for high school programs as well, right? An increase in this up and coming class for high school enrollments in biotech, which I think is, has anybody else seen the same pattern of increased enrollments with high school biotech programs if you have them in your state?
In Washington, yeah.
You're seeing that as well, Sandy?
Oh, yeah, lots of new programs starting.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is in Texas.
Okay.
Definitely, it's like double.
Well, we're from Florida, in the Orlando area. We have the Project Lead the Way, and then also Biotech with a base exam that's gaining national recognition. And we're a community college, our district, high school district, went from offering the base exam to less than 100 kids to over, they wanted to offer it to over 1,000 in a matter of a couple of years by an increase in biotech programs. So it's growing in our area.
That's interesting. That's good to hear. I guess, Scott, you come in from a different perspective. You're more or less in the classroom, but in your laboratory, your company, but yet you really play a strong mentoring role to the high school students who do internships with you. I mean, what kind of observations have you had around, what would help you as an industry partner who's willing and eager and ready to provide work-based learning opportunities, the internships for students? I mean, what would make it easier for you to be able to support those students? Has it been a challenge? What have you found that's worked for you?
So, for you to actually put kids into a position where they can go out and gain employment, it has to be a one-on-one kind of thing. It does not scale at all. So you need a feeder system, which we have in our biotech courses. And then from there, you get kids who you need to have time, right? Not all these kids have time to be able to do this, but actual science does not lend itself to a classroom period. You have to be able to come in and do actual science. And that's actually the thing that I find is lacking in school systems is people don't do anything. They don't do science. They are taught science. They're taught theory, but they don't get to actually use their hands and build something and create something and actually do science itself. And that's what really brings them in. And they then decide, wow, this is really interesting. I can make life out of chemicals. Anybody, I can teach 8th graders. I can teach 6th graders to make DNA. Easy, like that. And we do go out into school systems and we do a course where we make DNA and then I'll give a lecture to, the bioag course or the aquaculture course or this or that. And we'll make DNA out of fish or we'll make DNA out of plants. Everything has it. But that's the key. You need a feeder system that comes in and brings kids who have interest, and then they have to actually get in and do this hands-on. And for us, for instance, that's from like 2 to 5 o'clock. You need at least a 3-hour window to do anything in science because everything's hurry up and wait, right? You're doing things with your hands. If you have 45 minutes in a classroom, you can talk about science, but you can't do it.
And so kind of going to your point about the lack of ability to scale, so that lends itself to the idea that the really only way to scale is to duplicate people like you in industry that are willing to do this. So
the thing that you could use to scale this is like, what is that? What's the mentoring program, like children with, you get them mothers and dads?
Boys and Girls Club?
Like Boys and Girls Club, but not that one. Anyway, what you would need is like a club, okay, with a variety of scientists who volunteer their time to mentor various kids on an individual basis. You would need a lab place where they can go and do this kind of thing. But it really is, it has to be more of a one-on-one kind of thing where you're not a teacher, you're a mentor who's doing things with kids, actual hands-on work. That's what kids really like, right? Hearing about stuff is great, but that's school, okay? What they want to do is build stuff and do stuff.
And so I guess my question, go ahead, Sandy.
And talking about how critical Scott is to the work we do, we joke, because Scott is like our mad scientist. He loves science, and the kids love him because they know he loves science. And in some cases, he's just giving an overview or exploration, and he'll go into some of our classes and help kids see what it is. But at the upper end, Scott has worked with students. I'm thinking of Aisha, who came to him. She was doing cancer research with Scott. And then he said, what are you interested in? And she did antibiotic resistance. So he said, and so then he helped her design her own project and got a company to run her data.
She works for BioFire now.
She does. And in all honesty, we could not do what Scott does because a teacher, we have great teachers, and most of the teachers I hire come from industry, but Scott loves science. And the kids who work one-on-one with Scott really develop a passion, something that we couldn't do that he can do.
I've been spectacularly unsuccessful as an entrepreneur. And my greatest success has been with the kids.
It's interesting perspective. From the group out here, I mean, Scott represents kind of that demand side of the work-based learning brain, right? Sandy and Randy are kind of the supply side of the interns. But does everybody feel like if you had to give it an A or a B grade rating, that you're in that, A, B to A range for industry participation in your work-based learning programs like internships, apprenticeships, in life sciences? Do you feel like you're doing well, I guess is what I'm asking? You've got sufficient companies participating. Russ, you're down here.
100%.
100%. What do you think the secret to your success is?
Well, I love what Scott said. I mean, this is, to me, this is the key. You're not, every time somebody starts talking, I can see kids their eyes start closing, But every time you tell them, let's do something, and then actually if you can take some students and work with them longer, and I'm telling you what I witnessed, I'm not telling you what I do, right? And when I see that, I see a huge difference in the outlook. But it's time consuming. So, the question is, how do you do that? How do you find that? How do you make that happen?
And how do you find the companies willing to put that kind of time in? I thought I saw somebody else.
I'm from Washington State, and I think I work at Shoreline Community College, and at the community college level, I think we've been reasonably successful finding places who will take our students as interns. The more challenging thing is at the high school level. There's a huge demand for internships at the high school level, but there are all those liability issues where companies don't want to have people under 18 in their institution in case they get hurt, whatever. So that's a bigger challenge. There's just a tiny handful of internship opportunities for high school students.
Right. Yeah, and I think, go ahead.
I had kind of a comment question. For us, the challenge has been compensation for the student. So, besides what we can see, their career opportunities, what do the students get? Do they get any kind of stipend? Are they getting credit, course credit? Or are they getting paid for their internship?
Yes. So I say yes because it depends on the internship. Some of our internships are unpaid. A lot of companies like that because if they take an unpaid intern, by the way, life science is a difficult industry for us to crack. But some of our industries are unpaid. And in the state of Utah, if you're unpaid, the district pays workers' comp on the student, and we have a big liability umbrella over every student who goes on an internship. A lot of companies say, no, I want to pay. At the point they pay, and a lot of times I'll say to them, why don't you do an unpaid for about 40 hours, and then let's look at paid. When they go into paid, the company has to cover the workers' comp. And so, but we still, and the state is really good with us. We hold a huge liability policy on every intern. And so when I'm working with a hospital, they'll say to me, well, there's a thing in Utah called governmental immunity, and it says we won't pay over $400,000 in a lawsuit. And a hospital will say to me, well, nobody sues you for $400,000. And the nice part about the state, because we're insured by state risk management, their policy will cover the highest they've ever paid is about $11 million. So it's an overarching coverage for us, which allows us to link with industry partners. And so we really look at what is the partner ready for? Is it unpaid? When we go into composites, they start with unpaid, and in most cases won't take a person until they're 18. Construction right now, construction will take 16-year-olds on internships, but we build relationships with them. And so we have different kinds of partnerships with different companies.
Can I add something to that?
Absolutely.
Because of that issue, we do have some great industry advocates that are now working with legislators to look at what we are able to do with unpaid interns. And because our unemployment rate is so low in Utah, we have to think differently. Employers have to think differently. They have to do things differently. And so that includes specialized populations beyond what we normally think of, but also youth. And so they're looking at what do our state policies and statutes say about how we work with the unpaid interns, and can we match that with paid interns. And then another way that we can get compensation for students is if it's a part of an apprenticeship, because they are hired by the employer, so they are working and they're attending school at the same time. So I loved, Tammy, what you said earlier about learning by doing. I've been in the industry education partnership realm for over 20 years. And Tammy knows this from very early on. One of her current employees used to work for DWS, and we'd sit with Tammy when she was at Salt Lake Community College and Sandy and say, why are kindergartners counting 5 cats and 4 puppies to get 9? Why aren't we counting other things that are related to industry and careers, and just to kind of broaden their scope and their mind? And so to have these different math kits and different, what you were talking about, exploring with Milo, I was so excited because it's something that now I can see is starting to happen. And then building on that continuum, and I think Rochelle can speak to this too, the continuum of work-based learning, and starting in those earlier classes. We used to do some, I use my kids. I have one that's 21, so he's had to deal with this with me and my 15-year-old, but we'd go into the elementary school, work with the PTA, what can we do with the students at our school to help them learn about STEM. We had someone from the Leonardo come in and look in their ears. We had DNA with strawberries. We had a construction company and have them, they would mine a chocolate chip cookie, and they would teach them how to mine it and talk about it, but they were busy doing it, and then reclaiming the land which they were done. And so all of these things that have just one small touch point of what their reality is going to be once they grow up. I think about when I was 18, I was not prepared for adulthood, and I was a straight A student, and I, knew about all these different things and explored and just kind of was motivated, but nothing prepared me for the leap from education into employment. And so once it was there, it's like, oh, okay, this is what this is about. This is how I apply these skills and how to teach myself those things. But if we have that continuum of work-based learning where you have the exploration, you have the engagement, you have, and you move from, doing project class work to job shadows to an unpaid intern to a paid intern to an apprentice, it just helps you solidify and hone in on the skills that you have and where you want to go in the future, and have that early stepping stone into that career when you're able to do that.
So I'm really intrigued. I don't know if I heard this right or not, but of course, this idea of looking at state policy around internships and apprenticeships is possibly being tweaked. I have the same problem. We have over 120 high school students, and we had to create opportunities on campus for them because industry can't take them. So did I hear that we're working on state policy to change this so that high school students can do?
Yes, there's a group of industry partners that are working with legislators this year on what they can do with that. Part of this stems from they really wanted a requirement for apprenticeships to have a utilization requirement. So for any public works project, they wanted to require that an employer have a certain percentage of their workforce as an apprentice. Well, it's hard to do that when you can't find people. Like I said, our employment rate is 2.0%, but our growth rate is 3.4%, and private industry growth rate is 3.9%. So when you're not finding people, what else can you do? And so they're shifting a little bit, instead of requiring that they hire apprentices, into why aren't we doing more? How can we help change that? And so one of the other pieces that they talked about is, although we know with a registered apprenticeship you can hire someone at the age of 16, it's the insurance companies that will say, no, they need to be 18. So that's part of the conversation as well. And so I'm intrigued to see, this is very early on. Obviously the legislation hasn't been developed yet, but the conversation started happening in interim just within the last couple of weeks.
Any other states doing this, and are you the only state, or do you know that? I'm just.
Utah's legislators are really good to work with us, and sometimes they create bills that make it impossible to do our work. But then, well, they do. We had one that said if students in a company, you have to fingerprint anyone they're connected with. Well, in an auto dealership, that could be 15 people, and I had to fingerprint them. But we went back and said, this is a dumb law, not that way. And so they left the fingerprinting, but they said, what if you agreed to create a safety agreement? And so with our companies, we have what we call safety agreements, which basically says that a student won't be alone, and they're really good when you can show them, because they're trying to do the same things we are. They're trying to help companies, they're trying to help kids. And when you can show them what doesn't work, then you can get them to work with you on what can work.
Well, I'm just kind of intrigued to know if there's other states besides Utah that can be used as an example that are working on such a policy.
Massachusetts, Mass Bio has something like this.
Okay.
Virginia's
There's power in numbers.
Oh yeah, we'll be definitely doing some research, and we've kind of been working a little bit with Massachusetts and Virginia and North Carolina on some of these things, Wisconsin, when it comes to working with youth. Another example that I have is my son. He's 21. He started down the university path. So he would, me being in this space, I took him to every career fair possible. We had the very first family night when he was 6 years old, and had his daycare come and do a hands-on activity for families that were bringing their young children in. They built little birdhouses and toothpaste holders from Home Depot that they donated the kits. But I know that he's a hands-on learner, so of course I wanted him to do an apprenticeship, but in his mind he wanted to go to college. And even though the one he was participating in gave him college credit, in his mind he wasn't going to college because he wasn't going to that building on the hill. And so we've had to really do a lot of education on what college means, or what post-secondary education means, and having those on-ramps and off-ramps for people. But as part of this apprentice, so he found out very quickly he was not an online learner when COVID hit. He had a scholarship, 2 scholarships that he was in jeopardy of losing because of that. So he had to take one class for non-credit and then drop one. And he just felt really defeated. I'm wasting someone else's money. Now I wasted my time being off work to do this. And I'm going to have to take it again, which is more time. And what if I don't succeed again? So when they found out that fall they were going to be online again, I just totally backed off and thought, this is something he needs to work through and figure out without me coming and rescuing or pushing him in any direction. And that's when the first time that I saw his involvement in these activities pay off. Because before it was always, I'm going to do the opposite of what mom says because that's what she does at work. And yet all of these things finally started to flow through his thinking. His employer had an apprenticeship program, and they had offered, not only to pay for his education on the higher ed level, but through the apprenticeship. So he switched and he did that. Well, he just completed. The kid went from $16.50 an hour to $18 an hour to now $25 an hour. In 2 years. I've never had that kind of raise and don't think I ever will. And he's 21 years old. None of his friends are making that kind of money. And the program that he did was an apprenticeship in carpentry, and he was in the building construction design program. He gets credit for his building construction design program. So if he's not finished with his associates, we're in the works of getting the transcripts down. He's really close. And his employer said, if you want to go back, we'll help you pay for that too. But when he was in that apprenticeship, he called me one day on his way home, and he's like, Mom, I finally get it. And I'm like, what? He said, math. And he was a straight A student and didn't get math. But he's like, as part of this, I finally understood, because we had to determine these measurements for, you know, a certain area of cement and the layout and how much we were going to need. And the teacher liked how he came up with the equation once he made the connection. He knew how to do it. And the next day he taught the math class. So, you know, it's all of these things that are going to play into that. Bo, who's 15 now, we went to the first STEM Fest when he was 4. He got to build a paper rocket ship and shoot it up in the air. Coolest thing ever to him. He had no idea who Northrop Grumman was. At the time it was ATK. Had no idea that we built rockets in Utah. From that point forward, he did. So he'd tell all his friends, hey, did you know we built rockets in Utah? You know, we should go work there, you know? Yeah. So all of those experiences are going to help them at every age.
I would say half of my high school students can't do 3rd grade math. And the reason for that is just what you said. Math to them is this abstract thing. It has no value, no usage. They don't understand or care what it is until you ask them to use it in a situation that's real. I talk to my kids constantly. They can't even do fractions, all right? But if you show them this fraction means X, Y, Z in this particular, you know, lab experiment, it takes a while, but then they get it. And then they can actually do math, and I make them do it in their head. There's no calculators, no this or that. I tell them, okay, this is what I want. And they can then do it. But that's because they can see it, not because it's some jumble of things on a page. When you can see math, it becomes real.
That's so true. I think we've probably all experienced that in the programs that you guys have developed, implemented, are running. So I heard some whispering out there like, oh yeah, like math is the same issue anywhere. It's a universal situation, I think. I kind of want to switch, Michelle. I mean, I want people to understand kind of the unique role that you play, because, you know, like I said, Michelle comes from another state agency, Talent Ready Utah. It's in the governor's office. It's kind of, and we collaborate with them, but more with the work they really focus in on that kind of secondary to post-secondary kind of transition, I guess you should say, that part of the pipeline. Funded a lot of grants over the last couple of years. You've been involved with developing some of the key pathways. So for instance, there's a diesel mechanic, a diesel tech, and then we have an aerospace pathway, UAP, Utah Aerospace, and then I know that you're in kind of that transition phase with the medical innovations pathway, MIP, which is really probably what most of this group is interested in. Yeah. And so I'd like to give you a chance, if you want to, I know, because when it's in transition, it's kind of hard, like, oh, you know, we're kind of looking at it and lessons learned and kind of 2.0 version of it. And so if you want to speak to that, that would be great. But really what I wanted to ask you, and I know that I talked to a few people in other states that, you know, we've got this challenge, and I dare I say post-COVID, I hope it's post-COVID, we can say that. But that, I know for Salt Lake Community College, enrollments have really been a challenge. And for a variety of reasons that maybe other states are experiencing, such as, you know, the high cost of housing is really affecting a lot of our community college students and their ability to also afford tuition to go to school. So we're really looking at declining enrollments, I think, in a couple of our other higher education institutions as well. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I don't know if anybody else is seeing this is in their state, these kind of declining enrollments in their post-secondary institutions. Yeah, I think it's a national challenge as a result of the last couple of years and the increase in the cost of living. In your experience, because you work so closely with our post-secondary institutions and these work-based learning kind of continuums and pathway development, are you seeing an impact on not only industry participation to provide apprenticeships, youth apprenticeship opportunities, but students taking advantage of these and getting into these programs? Are you seeing any post-COVID challenges, like the low enrollments that's impacting it? If so, how are our institutions responding to it? And are there any corrections they're making?
Yeah, great question, Tammy. So, maybe to give a little bit of context, Talent Ready Utah, we were formed in the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity and now are housed in the Utah System of Higher Education. Similar to the STEM Action Center, we were moved out due to some streamlining, and hopefully we'll see some great growth like Tammy's seen with the STEM Action Center.
Yeah.
But the role that Talent Ready Utah plays is we're here to bridge the gap between education and industry for the purpose of workforce development. So we're very much industry facing and looking at the high demand jobs and roles and occupations throughout the state and coming up with workforce development solutions to fill those gaps. One of the ways in which we do that is through work-based learning. So we work with a lot of our partnerships here today, Melissa, Sandy, Caitlin, we've worked very closely with, and Tammy for several years to come up with these workforce development solutions or work-based learning programs that help connect young students to exploration activities that lead them to high demand jobs throughout the state, whether that's earlier on in lower grade levels where students are exploring, or more hands-on activities in their later years in high school that really help them make that connection. As far as COVID goes, we've seen enrollment numbers in our institutions of higher education decline over time. And I think COVID had an impact on that as well. But in regards to work-based learning, it's been challenging, particularly in this biotechnology sphere, where we've had increased precautions for safety due to COVID that limited students' access to some of the businesses who are letting students come in and really do that engagement. Another observation that I've made as I visited with our education partners at the secondary level as we've come out of COVID, and an anecdote that I feel like is repeated often is this idea that students are having a really hard time right now being engaged and staying engaged, being interested in the subjects that they're learning, even showing up to class. And we know that through work-based learning that there's a few things that impact students. They're more likely to complete their relevant coursework when they're participating in work-based learning. Their attendance rates go up and their graduation rates go up. So a lot of what I do is focusing on that secondary, leading into post-secondary, the on and off ramps that Melissa has mentioned, those stackable credentials that allow students to really pursue a long-term pathway. And I think more now than ever, we are seeing such a great need for work-based learning to take place at the secondary level to help re-engage those students to really explore what their next step is so that we can help guide them along that path and stay engaged. Also at the post-secondary level, work-based learning plays a significant role as well. I think Caitlin mentioned it. We've been having conversations at a statewide level about how do we keep students at the post-secondary credential level, the degree granting institutions engaged in their programs and in school to complete them while also getting credit or recognizing their work in the workplace so that they can get through their program more quickly, but also continue to earn that relevant work experience. So those are conversations that we're also having throughout the state. But Tammy, I don't want to take up too much time. Hopefully that gives you a good idea.
Any comments from that? Yeah, Tom.
Just one really quick one, and this has to do with emerging from COVID. And a lot of us in education pivoted from in-classroom teaching to online. And that impacted the way that the students were really being exposed to operational skills. When you talk about experience-based learning, I think some of it's still impacted by the way that we've done things over the last 2 years. So how has this transition for many educators impacted, A, the quality of product and student that we're putting into the workforce, And what is being done to counterbalance any issues that have arisen from a lack of hands-on training that we've been able to provide for the last few years?
Great question. You know, Tammy mentioned our Medical Innovations Pathway program, which was significantly impacted by COVID because it was a lot of our medical device manufacturing companies, some of our laboratory testing companies, where students were no longer able to come in and get those job shadows or some hands-on learning. And a lot of the companies did step up to the plate because they do value those opportunities to interact with the students and really help them become aware of what companies and what jobs are available to them leaving high school. And so a lot of those companies did offer some virtual learning experiences, whether that was a virtual tour of their facility or they, conferenced into the classroom and had a discussion with the students. And I think that was helpful. There's also challenges with it, which Sandy, I'm sure you can speak to some of those, where the students were getting so much of that same content that it became probably uninteresting to them. But I think that was a space that our employers really did step up to the plate and really engaged that way. But it did kind of unveil some, opportunities for improvement where we could better align our education and industry partners to offer more project-based learning or hands-on experiences in the classroom when maybe those virtual or those in-person on-site opportunities aren't available.
I think that's where those kits, would be important in the use for those. I will say, although COVID was tough on the apprenticeship side, the bright spot that it presented is that it did allow for some online learning, which allowed for remote work. So of course this is going to be more on our IT side rather than in our, more hands-on type delivery of instruction. But even with construction, they're doing more virtual VR resources for training, actual training. You can do a lot of your safety training that way and at least have some simulated pieces of the curriculum that they could do online before they had to jump into the hands-on. So not all of them were able to pivot as easily, but it did open up that opportunity for some to be able to do that.
What I saw was really interesting in the sense that we were running a program in cyber biosecurity, and so we were interacting with our cybersecurity department really closely, and they had an abundance of work-based opportunities, but the reason was because all these people work in their houses. So I thought that was really fun and cool, and I was trying to figure out, maybe that could translate a little bit, from a bioinformatics perspective.
I think you'll see a lot of movement, especially on the cybersecurity space. The president announced a 120-day sprint just last week, really pushing and connecting industry with education through apprenticeships for cybersecurity over the next 120 days. So that's probably something you'll see some more effort around in the next couple of months in your states as well.
Your question is interesting though, with attendance. I track data, and Tammy will tell you that when we sit on data, I'm the one who wants it really good. But over the years, I can prove 2 to 5% better attendance for kids who are in concentration mode of CTE coursework. I can prove higher grade GPAs, and I also can show better connection with communities, except during COVID. And it was really interesting with COVID, when you wipe out the hands-on, my attendance percentages were 2 to 5% below what the academic classes were doing because the kids didn't want to do CTE online. And we bought a lot of tools that they could actually do simulations and all these things. That's not what they were looking for. And so really the whole push is to let them do. Let them come and do and try. And we're actually moving that to elementary next year with a computer science grant we got, where the students will actually have, each grade will have different robots, different kind of tools, and they'll apply math and science by teaching computer science. So we're not targeting computer science, we're targeting improvement in math and science.
Quick question, how long do you track the students? Do you track them into higher ed institutions and CTE programs or into workforce?
I can track, like I said earlier, I can track them easily into higher ed as long as the college is part of the National Student Clearinghouse. I have an easy opportunity to track that, and I can tell you because I usually look at 6-year back data because that's about how long it takes students to graduate. My 6-year data would suggest that less than 40% of our students enter college, and at the end, less than that 40% will only have 20% who got any kind of degree. And by the way, in most cases, it's 4-year degrees, it's not 2-year degrees. But as you look at that data, I have an easy time tracking that. Employment is really hard. Years ago, I said to Melissa, can't we figure out how to do this? And we did a matching of Social Security numbers. It was crap data. And I'm sorry, but you come back and you say, well, you have 20% kids working in what? So they wouldn't give me any, because they really couldn't go student by student. So all I knew is that I had 20% kids working. It was worse than when I make phone calls.
And that makes it tough. We do have some improving efforts, if you will, with the system of higher education. We used to have the Utah Data Research Center that's now moved over to them. But definitely the Social Security number is the key to track employment. But the other piece of that, where you get the data from in the new hire registry, they don't have permission from the employers to release the direct employer, and there's no one that gathers the exact occupation by code. And they all call it something different. You have a composites tech that might be an assembly line, or it's just called 12 different things by the employers. And so when you have that, it's really, really hard to track the data. One area of data that I can say, we took a page out of Tammy's book at a project that we're all working on for NSF-ATE, our Labs 2 project. As being part of that group helped me to see, when we were working on CTE and identifying behaviors and attitudes toward it, I wanted to do the same thing with apprenticeships because my position is fairly new. It's something that was legislatively approved and put in statute in the 2019 session. And so I was appointed in August of 2019 as the state's first commissioner of apprenticeship programs. My overall goals are to promote apprenticeship programs, identify best practices as well as constraints and barriers, and make recommendations to the legislature on how to improve and expand apprenticeship programs. We also track the data, but we don't own apprenticeships. We're called what's an OA state, or an Office of an Apprenticeship State. We have a state director from our federal partner here in Salt Lake City. And so we have to coordinate with them because the data is not ours, the data is theirs. That's another area where I have to do survey work to gather all of the information to tell the full story. With this behaviors and attitudes, I didn't feel like I could make recommendations that first year until we really took a deep dive to see what are we doing in Utah around apprenticeships. So we did some survey work. We surveyed industry, we surveyed educators, we surveyed parents, we surveyed students. We wanted to know, do they know what apprenticeships are? Do they like them, not like them? Would they refer someone to them? What are our constraints? And then how we use that information to then turn around and develop communication strategies and tools and resources to help engage them. What we found is not that people don't like apprenticeships, they just didn't know how to connect to apprenticeships. They didn't know where they would fit in as a business or as a related training provider, or how to be an apprenticeship sponsor, or what we call an intermediary sponsor. All of these things were new terms to them, but they also had outdated views as to what apprenticeships are. Everyone thinks of an electrician or a plumber when you say the word apprentice. But we had a grant over the last 3 years where we were diversifying apprenticeships in manufacturing, healthcare, and IT. We're still working on the healthcare and IT space this next year, and even some manufacturing. We did continue construction because we have a huge growth there. But again, taking that survey data, we were able to develop a new website. It's apprenticeship.utah.gov. But we also did a day in the life of an apprentice video series, because if you can see them, you can be them. And so we were very strategic in the individuals that we chose to be in them from each industry. We have good representation across ethnicity and race, with women and men, and with youth and adults. And so again, to kind of show people what it's like to be in that industry. Oh, and there's someone else that started in high school, you mean I can do that? And so, you know, that has garnered a lot of attention, and they put all of our resources in the Workforce GPS arena, which is something that's developed by the Department of Labor to share best practices and resources. And so all of our videos are there. And then we just released one a couple weeks ago from employers' perspective. Why do they do apprenticeships? Why do they find it valuable? Where did they find their place in that? Why did they start doing that? Why would they recommend for someone else to do it? We do these quarterly business-to-business events with employers, but we have a panel of employers speaking to employers, because it doesn't matter if I come in and say how great they are. I'm not working with them, and I don't know what they had to do to set that up. And so they're able to share with them the good, bad, and the ugly. Not ending with the ugly, but just how did they work through that barrier for that company, and things they wish they would have known when they started their programs. But when I said that they have to start thinking differently, this is where this one-on-one mentoring comes in, because you have that ratio of having an apprentice to a mentor with that company. But you're hiring people earlier on, you're able to help help participate in the education process. So instead of pointing the finger and saying, you're not giving me enough of this, or you guys aren't providing the right education because when they come out, they still can't do X, Y, Z, well, this puts them in the driver's seat so that they can partner with you as an education partner to develop that curriculum, determine what should be taught in the classroom versus what's taught on the job by the employer. And so these are things that we see are really important. One of the advantages that we have with me being housed within the Department of Workforce Services is that we administer all of our federal funding programs in terms of financial assistance, SNAP programs, vocational rehabilitation, Veterans Affairs, Office of Child Care, and Refugee Services Office. And so, and homelessness office. So we're able to connect to all of these specialized populations, again, when we're thinking about doing things differently. One opportunity I can see for our educators is to develop pre-apprenticeship programs, because if you're helping some of these marginalized populations, a pre-apprenticeship is designed to help them be successful in a full apprenticeship. So if you can help them with some of those workplace skills, life skills, maybe some math remediation, that's going to help them be better prepared when they enter into an apprenticeship.
That's a good point.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the most popular apprenticeship program in Utah?
I would say probably our most utilized right now is still construction, but because there's a lot of them. But we do have several in the automotive space. That has grown quite a bit over the past couple of years. We are seeing an uptick in manufacturing, but our biggest interest right now, but they're just trying to put the pieces together, is both healthcare and IT.
Does the ones CPT come up at all, Certified Production Technician?
We're using that, but I don't think it's called that. We do have a manufacturing technician, we have a CNC machinist, process manufacturing. So there's different elements of it. They're just called something different.
Thank you.
So I think what I'm going to do in light of time, I know Randy, you had a comment, and if you don't, I have a question for you, and then I'm going to let Scott close out, because I have one question for him to close it all out. And then what we'll do is we'll segue for about 25 minutes. Because Lisa brought up our current NSF AT project, and we're talking to Linnea. We both thought it'd be fun if our external evaluators who ran the data for that took about 20-25 minutes virtually to show you some of the data around that we collected around behaviors and attitudes towards these career and tech eds. There was a couple surprises with that data that I thought were kind of interesting that you'd share. We'll just do that. Audrey said she could do it in about 20-25 minutes. So what I want to do is close out here. And Randy, if you don't want to, if you had a comment, I know,
yes.
but if it's out of context now.
Yeah, context at this point. Going back to the question about COVID and coming out of COVID and what that means for students, what I'm seeing, at least at the secondary level, is students who basically promoted 2 years of life without learning a whole lot. And so I've had to retool my courses and my approach to get students to show up, do something. And I found pulling from the work-based service tool set is been very productive. I found that a transition back into regular expectations doesn't work. They don't really have, they've lost the idea that something needs to be turned in on a certain date. And so I've just gone kind of with the work-based model, and the first few weeks it's a rough learning curve, and a bunch of students get smacked upside the head and are trying to figure out what's going on with their life. But some take longer to figure it out, but the ones that recognize, okay, this is something I'm going to have to do, and then they engage in it. If we're not just lecturing in the classroom, we're giving them something to do and mentoring them, helping them, rather than just instructing them. They respond to that, and they're able to get caught up. So I was just to say, there's going to be a time, a bubble, as we move our students back into education as opposed to what they had.
That's a good point. I mean, I know I was kind of hoping that 2 years of online learning would make them hungry for hands-on, and want to just jump right back into it with an eagerness that was.
And they do, they just don't know it. They have to
Gotcha.
be convinced.
Okay, thanks. It's got to have, I'm going to let you close it out, and I'm going to just ask you one basic question. It goes back to, I'm intrigued by this scaling comment you made, and I'm just going to ask you to give us one or two recommendations on how we make more of you. How do we clone you? What are two things we could do? to
So
make
my
more of you?
suggestion on how to scale this is to create a big brother, big sister type of organization under the school system aegis, and engage with the corporate system around the valley, here or wherever you guys are, right? And they're often very happy to help, but again, legal issues, all sorts of issues with them participating as a corporation, but they'll send their guys, right? And there's tons of their guys who are very interested in this. If you provide the umbrella that they can work to and make it easy for them to pop in and be able to do this, you can scale it up to a big brother, big sister kind of thing. Beyond that, it just doesn't lend that, because you need that individual thing. But we're kind of doing that in a small way where we are. But if you brought in companies from around your various states, in your city, wherever you're located, you would be able to scale it up a bit.
Okay, great. And I actually lied. I'm going to let Rochelle have one more thing too, because I think with the work you've been doing with the Innovations Pathway, transitioning to kind of a 2.0, what do you think is going to be the one big change that's going to happen in the new pathway for medical innovations? What's the one change that's going to really, you think, make a difference?
So I think Caitlin and I had a meeting about this last week actually, and we were talking about how do we organize industry around, a cohort of industry around offering work-based learning so it's streamlined for them. And we were looking at, what area of biotech do we focus on, what companies do we look at, and I think one thing that we've found successful is honing in on a specific skill set. And so we've been talking about how do we maybe not only engage healthcare innovations or life sciences, but multiple industries throughout the state that share a similar skill set so that students have increased opportunities where they can take the learned skill that they have and apply it to multiple industries where their career paths then are just broadened. But also, it creates some competitiveness between industries where those industries who really step up to the plate and want to engage and offer those work-based learning experiences can pull from this talent pool of students that is now broadened as well. So we're looking at possibly cybersecurity or something underneath that computer sciences umbrella that could tie into multiple industries.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I just want to add to that, not as a computer science, but in biomanufacturing. A good example of this, our company, SBI, we were able to donate to 22 schools across the country our equipment, our CG2 and list. And now, after the end of 2 years, we're going to have loads of students trained on our equipment, and we sell the industry. So now we've created pipelines for jobs.
That's very, I like that.
Yeah, it's a great model. I think we're hoping that more businesses will follow it.
I love it. And that's a great way to close on kind of a nice, promising best practice.